Well, greetings, Good Shepherd Church. My name is Claudio Grandjean. I'm one of your elders here, and I have the privilege of serving in that capacity. And I just want to bring Devotional to you. Hopefully, it'll be uplifting for you. We are still getting together. It's kind of strange what the circumstance we're under. I don't like the fact that we can't actually physically gather, and I'm sure many of you don't like that either. But the good news about it is we've found other ways to connect, and I think ways in which we probably wouldn't have had we not been thrust into the circumstance that we're in right now. So many of the other ministries have figured out other ways to connect, and that's good news. But of course, we would rather be physically gathering, and I think we will be soon. The best description I've heard of what the times we're in right now is, it's like I'm 16. Gas prices are cheap, and I'm grounded. But anyway, we're going to get through this. It's been about 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks, since this executive order from the governor has been in place, March 23rd to be exact. And the good news for us here in Oregon is that we implemented this early on when we had dozens of cases, not hundreds or even thousands, like some of the other states had. And so we've gotten ahead in terms of trying to flatten that curve, which we've been hearing all about. So all over the country, similar orders have been implemented. Actually, 42 of the states have similar orders like we have here, that kind of stay-at-home type orders. And one of the things I was reading when I was kind of just reading up on this was seeing how there are some pastors across the country who are defying their orders. They're openly in defiance against it. They're saying they're not going to listen. There was one in Florida, a guy named Rodney Howard Brown, who he called the service together. They had a service, and he got arrested. Another one in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, pastor of a church of about 1,000, a pretty good congregation. They got together. When they were called on it, he said, we're going to get together again. We're going to defy it and continue to meet in defiance of the order in Louisiana, and said, our members don't care if they die. And so looking at this, it made me think, what should our response be to something like this, an order that many of us aren't happy with and would rather not do? What's the proper response? And so it took me back to a pretty familiar verse, Romans 13, which I want to share with you here in a second. I'm just the first few verses of Romans 13, about the first 5 verses. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror to those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible judgment, but also as a matter of conscience. And then it goes on about paying taxes. Now, I don't want to be misunderstood, and I think that verse over the years, it's easy to misinterpret it and just say, well, see, it says we should listen to the government, it's ordained by God, and that's the end of the story. I don't think it's that simple, especially because we are to read the Bible within the context of the Bible. And if we look at the entire Bible, there is quite a history of civil disobedience. You go all the way back to Exodus. And had it not been for civil disobedience, then Moses wouldn't have lived through his childhood. In Daniel, clear act of civil disobedience against Nebuchadnezzar, and he was rewarded for that. In Acts, in the New Testament, Peter and John in Acts 4 also disobeyed, got thrown in jail and for preaching the gospel, and they disobeyed. Even in modern times, if you look at probably the most well-known civil rights leader in our modern histories is probably Martin Luther King Jr., and moved by his conscience as a Christian, he organized marches in acts of civil disobedience to change some what we saw as immoral laws. Even our own church has a history of civil disobedience by people who, moved by their conscience, chose to disobey. So there is a precedent for civil disobedience within the Christian church. The question we need to ask ourselves is this time for that? Is it appropriately applied here? If you look at all these examples I just gave, those examples were applied when the law, the edict, the ordinance that was put out was in direct conflict with what God teaches, what God tells us to do. That's what we need to ask ourselves. And I don't see that here. I don't think we're in that type of situation. People are saying, well, we're not able to gather. But churches aren't being singled out. That's an important thing, important distinction to make. Churches aren't being singled out here. What they're saying with an order like this is, for a season, temporarily, we know that this virus spreads when people gather together. So in all places where people gather together, churches, sporting events, professional sporting events, high school events, schools, concerts, all these places, we need to not gather temporarily for a season. We're still doing this, right? We're still continuing to have our worship time and have our church services, albeit online. This is just for a season. So I don't think there's a conflict with God's word. And if we go back to that verse, especially looking at verse 3 and 4, where it says, "Rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you'll be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servant, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer." I think Paul's he's applying a qualifier there where he's saying, generally, the governments do what's right. Generally, the governments help you. If you think about it, it's true. If you rape, rob, commit homicide, assault, there are consequences for that bad action. So generally, that's true, that the governments come after people that do things that are bad, and the governments do things to help you. And I think we can look at this law and apply it that way and say, is this to help us? It is. We're trying to stop the spread of a disease that particularly hits some of the more vulnerable people in our population a little bit harder. And so we're coming out the other end of it. I think we're really close to seeing the end of this. So in the meantime, what should we do? I think one of the things we can do is look beyond this. And when I say that, I think it's easy to say, well, we'll just look into June, July, or whenever this is over, where we can kind of pick up the pieces and continue with our lives, which is fine. But I'm saying look beyond, way beyond. Let's look to eternity, because that's really where our focus should be, not just a little bit past this. This coronavirus thing is temporary for sure, but this whole life here is temporary. And we should, as Christians, keep that in mind and be looking beyond that. So how do you do that? How do you look beyond? I would encourage you to go back to Steve Keel's message from a couple weeks ago, where he told us what we do and how we do it. We keep our eyes on whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is admirable, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is right. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, these are the things we need to be thinking about. And of course, where do we find that? We find that in the Bible. And Steve even kind of went through a how-to. If you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to go back and look at that. So my final, I guess, exhortations and encouragement to you is some of the things you can do. Limit your social media time. I know we still need to connect, and it's one of the ways we can connect now when we're not able to go out as freely as we'd like to. But you can go down a rabbit hole that kind of takes you into some negative places. Limit your time on social media. Don't listen to TV news. Just turn it off. Don't listen to any of it. We're in the information age, and we can get a lot of information straight from the source. So you can go to the CDC webpage. You can go to the Oregon Health Authority, your county's health authority, and get information about what's happening now. You can go to the State of Oregon page to find out where we're at with the governor's order. You don't need somebody to tell you what you should think. And so I would just stay away from the TV news. And don't veg out on Netflix and binge watch on Netflix. People suggest that with the best of intentions because they're trying to keep us inside and trying to keep us from going out. But instead, spend some time in God's Word. During this time, I have just been writing an electronic note that I keeping verses that are encouraging, or verses that some of our pastors have been teaching on that are encouragement to me, and I just keep writing them and I go back to them. I'd encourage you to do the same. Some of them, for example, are Matthew 10:28, 2 Timothy 1:7, Romans 5:3-5, Hebrews 12:1 and 2. There's others. Whatever encourages you, keep your eyes and your mind on there. And finally, think of this. Coronavirus is going to fade. It's going to go away. We're going to find a vaccine for it. The executive order is going to be lifted. It's temporary. God's church is not going to fade. There is no vaccination for it. The church is not going to be, there's not going to be an order that's going to lift the church. The gates of hell will not prevail against our church. So I am sure we're going to be back together. Be encouraged and be an encouragement to the people around you, because we're going to see you soon in person when we gather again.